Welcome back to the deep dive, where we love to take these deep dives into all sorts of topics and really, get to the bottom of things, extract those golden nuggets of knowledge that you can actually use. And today we're going to be talking about persuasive writing, specifically through the lens of a book that I think is considered a classic in the field, Dan Kennedy's The Ultimate Sales Letter. Now, you might be thinking, sales letters, isn't that a little bit old school? But trust me, the principles that Dan Kennedy lays out in this book are anything but outdated.
Yeah, I mean, they're really, really timeless.
Yeah.
They're fundamental to effective communication in any context.
Exactly. And it's not just about writing sales letters, it's about understanding how to influence and persuade in any situation. Whether you're sending an email, giving a presentation, even just having conversation, these principles are super valuable. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a deep dive into the ultimate sales letter. And we're going to pull out those core strategies and techniques that you can apply to your own communication to make it more powerful and more effective.
Right. And, this is like a one-stop shop for all things copywriting. Kennedy covers everything from the core philosophies to really practical step-by-step processes. You've got headline formulas, persuasive writing structures, and, a whole bunch of techniques for motivating people to take action.
Yeah. So think of this as like your accelerated course in persuasive communication, the Dan Kennedy way. So before we jump into the specifics, where does Kennedy suggest we start? What's the foundation of writing a really effective sales letter or really any persuasive communication?
Well, Kennedy is really adamant about this. He says, before you even think about writing a single word, you absolutely have to understand your customer inside and out. And he actually gives you a set of 10 questions. He calls them the 10 smart market diagnosis and profiling questions. And these questions are designed to really get you thinking deeply about who your target audience is.
Okay. So let's dig into these questions a little bit. What are some of the things he wants us to consider?
Well, he doesn't just focus on the basic demographics like age or income or location. He goes way deeper than that. He asks things like, what keeps them awake at night? Indigestion, boiling up their esophagus, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. I mean, talk about getting vivid, right?
Right.
But it really gets to the heart of what people are worried about, what their anxieties are. And he also asks, what are they afraid of? And what are they angry about? And who are they angry at? So you start to understand their emotional landscape, their frustrations, their pain points.
Yeah, it's about tapping into those core human emotions, right?
Exactly. And then he asks, what are their top 3 daily frustrations? Which is a really practical way to understand what they're struggling with on a day-to-day basis. And then he goes even further and says, what trends are occurring and will occur in their businesses or lives? So it's about looking at the bigger picture, anticipating what's coming down the road. And of course, you can't forget about desires. He asks, what do they secretly, ardently desire most? This is about understanding their aspirations, their dreams, their unmet needs.
Yeah. And it's amazing how often we, especially if we're the ones trying to sell something, we forget to even ask these basic questions. We kind of assume we know what our audience wants or needs.
Right. Kennedy actually warns against this. He calls it ingrained assumption. He says, especially if you're a business owner and you're writing about your own product or service, it's so easy to get caught up in your own perspective and to forget to really see things from the customer's point of view.
Yeah, it's so easy to get blinded by our own enthusiasm. And we end up highlighting all the things we think are amazing instead of focusing on what our audience actually cares about. And
Wow.
this is so important for our listeners, because you guys are always trying to learn new things, to stay ahead of the curve. And this idea of understanding your audience is critical, even if that audience is, a whole field of knowledge.
Absolutely. You have to figure out what are the key questions that people in that field are grappling with. What are the challenges? What are the aspirations? That's where you start.
Right. It's about entering that conversation that's already happening in their minds. And I think that actually leads us to another one of Kennedy's principles, which is something called the Collier Principle.
Oh, yeah. This one's a good one.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that.
So the Collier Principle basically says, always enter the conversation already occurring in the customer's mind.
Okay, that's really interesting. So how do we actually do that? What does that look like in practice?
Well, it means thinking about what your audience is already interested in, what they're already talking about, what's already top of mind for them. And then you tailor your message to fit into that existing conversation. You don't want your communication to feel like an interruption, like something completely out of the blue. You want it to feel like a natural continuation of something they're already engaged with.
So if you were trying to get someone up to speed on, say, the latest developments in artificial intelligence, you wouldn't start with, a history of computing. You'd jump right into the current debates around AI ethics or the latest breakthroughs in machine learning.
Exactly. Because those are the things that people are already thinking about and talking about.
Okay, I see. So it's about finding that point of connection, that shared interest, and then building from there. Okay, so we've talked about understanding our audience, entering their conversation. What's next?
Okay, so now we got to talk about actually communicating the value of what we're offering. And this is where Kennedy makes a crucial distinction between features and benefits.
Ah, yes, the classic marketing 101. Explain that for our listeners who maybe haven't heard this before.
Sure, so features are basically the characteristics of your product or service. They're the what is it, what does it have? Benefits, on the other hand, are what your product or service does for the customer. It's the why. Why should they care?
Okay, so give us an example.
Okay, so let's say you're selling a new smartphone. A feature might be that it have a 108 megapixel camera, but the benefit is that you can take stunning professional quality photos that you'll want to share with everyone. See the difference?
Yeah, absolutely. One is just a technical spec, and the other one is an actual outcome, a result that the customer cares about.
Exactly. And Kennedy really emphasizes this. He says, people don't buy features, they buy benefits. They buy what those features will do for them. So he actually recommends making a list of every single feature of your product or service and then translating each feature into a tangible benefit for the customer. And then he says, organize those benefits by order of importance, not to you, but to the customer.
Oh, that's an interesting point because sometimes we might think a certain feature is like the coolest thing ever, but it might not actually be that important to our audience.
Right. And Kennedy even gives this great example. He talks about an ordinary apple. And he says, instead of just saying, this apple contains vitamins and minerals, which is a feature, you could list each specific vitamin and mineral and then go into detail about all the amazing health benefits that each one provides. Like, for example, you could say, this apple is packed with vitamin C, which is known to boost your immune system and protect you from getting sick. Or you could say, it's also a great source of fiber, which can help with digestion and keep you feeling full and satisfied. And you could even go further and say, to get the same amount of vitamin C as you get from this one apple, you'd have to eat like 5 oranges or a whole bowl of broccoli. You see how that paints a much more compelling picture of the value of that apple.
Yeah, absolutely. You're making me crave an apple right now.
That's the way it works.
Okay, so we've talked about understanding our audience, entering their conversation, and highlighting benefits. Now, this next point from Kennedy is a little bit counterintuitive. He talks about the power of what he calls damaging admission copy. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Damaging admission copy is basically where you openly acknowledge potential drawbacks or flaws in your offer.
Wait a minute. You're telling me we should actually point out the negatives. That seems kind of crazy. Why would we do that?
I know, right? It seems counterintuitive, but Kennedy argues that this can actually make your message more believable and more persuasive. By admitting to certain limitations or weaknesses, you demonstrate honesty and transparency, which builds trust with your audience. You basically come across as more authentic and relatable. And it also allows you to proactively address potential objections that your audience might have. You're essentially getting ahead of those objections and disarming them before they even have a chance to form in the reader's mind.
So instead of trying to hide or downplay any potential negatives, you're actually bringing them to the forefront.
Exactly. You're addressing them head on. And by doing so, you're showing your audience that you're not trying to pull the wool over their eyes. You're not afraid to be honest about the limitations of your offer. And this can actually make them more likely to trust you and believe the rest of your message.
Okay, so give us an example. How would you use damaging admission copy in a real-world situation?
Okay, so let's say you're selling an online course. And one of the potential drawbacks is that it requires a significant time commitment from the student. Now, you could try to downplay this or avoid mentioning it altogether, but that might make your audience skeptical. Instead, you could use damaging admission copy and say something like, look, this course is not for everyone. It's going to require a serious commitment from you. You're going to have to put in the time and effort to get the most out of it.
I see. So you're not sugarcoating it. You're being upfront about the challenges involved.
Exactly. And then you can go on to explain why it's worth it. You can talk about the amazing results that students have achieved, the valuable skills they've learned, the transformative impact it's had on their lives. So you're acknowledging the drawback, but then you're immediately reframing it as an opportunity for growth and success.
That's a really powerful technique, and it's definitely something I'm going to start using in my own writing and communication.
Me too.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of really valuable strategies so far, But I think it's important to remember that even if you write the most brilliant sales letter or email or presentation, if people don't actually read it, it's all for nothing. So how do we make sure that our message gets noticed and actually read?
That's a great point. And Kennedy actually talks about this quite a bit. He says, and I'm quoting him here, "No one is sitting around hoping and praying that he will receive your sales letter. When it arrives, it is most likely an unwelcome pest."
That's pretty harsh, but I guess it's true.
Yeah, people are bombarded with messages all day long, so your message has to really stand out if you want it to be noticed. And one of the most important elements for achieving this is your headline.
Yeah, the headline is crucial. It's like the first impression. It has to grab the reader's attention and make them want to keep reading. So, what are some of Kennedy's tips for writing effective headlines?
Well, he talks about a concept called flagging, which is basically using a specific word or phrase in your headline to target a specific group of people. You're essentially signaling to them that this message is for them, that it's relevant to their interests or needs. And he gives a lot of really great examples of fill-in-the-blank headline formulas that you can use, like, "They didn't think I could D, but I did," or "Who else wants a," or "Warning." And these are all really effective because they tap into our natural curiosity and our desire to know more.
Hmm.
And another really powerful flagging strategy he talks about is focusing on the problem that your product or service solves. You can do this by asking a direct question in your headline.
So, instead of a generic headline like, "Improve your sleep," you might ask, "Are you tired of tossing and turning all night?"
Exactly. That immediately speaks to the specific problem that your target audience is facing.
Right. It's like you're saying, "Hey, I understand your pain and I have a solution for you."
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got a killer headline. People are hooked. They're reading our message. What now? How do we structure our message in a way that's persuasive and keeps them engaged?
Well, Kennedy is a big believer in using proven formulas and structures for persuasive writing. And one of his favorites is the problem agitation solution formula.
Okay, that sounds pretty straightforward. Tell me more about how it works.
Sure. So the first step is to clearly identify the problem that your audience is facing. You really want to paint a vivid picture of their pain points and make them feel the urgency of the situation. And then you want to agitate that problem. You want to make it even bigger and more painful in their minds, so they really feel the need for a solution. And only then do you introduce your product or service as the solution to their problem. And you highlight all the ways that your offer can alleviate their pain and help them achieve their desired outcome.
So it's not just about presenting your solution, it's about really setting the stage and building up to it.
Exactly. You want to make sure that your audience is fully invested in the problem before you offer the solution. And Kennedy even shares this great quote from his sales trainer friend, Kaved Robert, who said that to effectively sell life insurance or even cemetery plots, you need to make your customer, and I quote, "see the hearse backed up to the door." I mean, talk about problem agitation, right? But
Yeah.
it really gets the point across.
Wow, that's a powerful image. So you're not just saying, "Hey, you might need life insurance someday." You're making them feel the potential consequences of not having it.
Precisely. And Kennedy talks about a couple of other persuasive structures as well. He mentions the fortune-telling approach,
Right.
where you essentially paint a picture of a desirable future outcome and then position your offer as the key to achieving that outcome. And he also talks about the winners and losers formula, where you create a sense of exclusivity and clearly define who will benefit from your offer and who will miss out.
So it's about creating a sense of urgency and highlighting the potential consequences of inaction.
Exactly. You want to give people a reason to act now, not later.
Okay, so we've talked about how to structure our message in a persuasive way, how to make it stand out and get noticed. But ultimately, the goal of all this persuasive communication is to get the reader to take a specific action. So how do we motivate our audience to take that action?
Right. Kennedy provides a whole toolkit of techniques for motivating action. One category he talks about is intimidation, which might sound a little harsh, but it's really about using scarcity and urgency to encourage people to act quickly. So, for example, you might offer a limited number of products or services, or you might set a deadline for a special offer. And this creates a sense of fear of missing out, or FOMO, which can be a powerful motivator.
Right. It's like those limited time offers you see all the time. They really do work.
They do. Another category he talks about is challenging ego. This is where you basically appeal to people's sense of pride and accomplishment. So, for example, you might say something like, "This offer is only for those who are serious about achieving their goals." Or you might create an application process where people have to qualify to receive your offer. And this makes people feel like they're part of an exclusive group, which can be very motivating.
Yeah, it's like that velvet rope effect. Everyone wants to be on the other side of that rope.
Exactly. And then there's a very practical technique of demonstrating ROI. This is all about showing people the financial return on investment that they can expect from your offer. So you're
Oh.
essentially selling them money at a discount. And this is particularly effective in business-to-business contexts where people are always looking for ways to increase their profits or reduce their costs.
Right. It's all about showing them the bottom line.
Exactly. And Kennedy even talks about a technique where you initially present a slightly inflated ROI figure and then you adjust it downwards to still sound incredibly profitable. It's a subtle but effective way to create a sense of value.
That's clever. So, what other methods does he suggest?
Well, there's also ego appeals, which are all about positioning your offer as a way to enhance the buyer's status or image. So you might talk about how your product or service will make them look more successful or more attractive or more sophisticated. And then there are strong guarantees, which are essential for reducing perceived risk and overcoming buyer hesitation. Kennedy outlines various types of guarantees, from the standard money-back guarantee to more compelling options like refund and keep the premium, which means that even if the customer isn't satisfied, they still get to keep something of value.
That's interesting. So, you're actually incentivizing them to try your product or service, even if they have some doubts.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the timeless power of storytelling, using narratives to engage the reader on an emotional level and illustrate your message in a memorable way.
Stories are so powerful, they can really draw people in and make them feel connected to your message.
They really can. And Kennedy gives a lot of great examples of how to use storytelling effectively in sales letters and other forms of persuasive communication.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of specific techniques and strategies, but I think it's important to step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture. What are some of the overarching copywriting principles that Kennedy consistently emphasizes throughout the book?
Yeah, good point. Kennedy has a lot of really great insights about the art of copywriting in general. One of the most important things he stresses is to always write for the buyer, not for the non-buyer. In other words, you're not trying to convince everyone to buy your product or service. You're focusing on the people who are most likely to be interested, and you're tailoring your message specifically to them. And he also talks about the double readership path, which is the idea that your communication should be designed to cater to two different types of readers, those who skim and those who read every word. So you need to use headlines, subheads, and visuals to guide skimmers to the most important information, while also providing enough detail in the body of the text to satisfy those who are really engaged.
Okay, that makes sense. So you're essentially creating multiple entry points for your message.
Exactly. And Kennedy also emphasizes the importance of internal repetition, which is the idea of repeating key benefits and messages multiple times throughout your communication. This helps to reinforce your message and make it more memorable.
So it's like that old saying, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them.
Exactly. Repetition is key. And then there's readability, which Kennedy says is super important. He recommends using short paragraphs, focusing on one key idea per paragraph, creating yes momentum by starting with easily agreeable statements and using end-of-page carryovers to encourage the reader to keep going. He says you want to make your writing as easy to read as possible so people don't get bogged down or lose interest. And he also stresses the importance of being interesting and even entertaining. He says, use vivid sensory language and high-impact words. Don't be afraid to be creative and to show some personality in your writing.
So it's not just about conveying information, it's about doing it in a way that's engaging and enjoyable for the reader.
Exactly. You want to make them feel something, not just think something. And then there's the idea of being personal and conversational in your writing, anticipating and directly addressing potential questions and objections, as if you were having a one-on-one conversation with the reader.
I like that. It's about building that connection, that rapport through your writing.
Precisely.
Okay, so what about creating urgency? How do we encourage people to take action right away rather than putting it off?
Well, Kennedy suggests using techniques like clearly stating limited availability, offering valuable premiums or bonuses for quick responses, setting explicit deadlines, and even providing discounts for fast action or penalties for delaying. And he emphasizes the strategic use of the PS, the postscript, and the very end of the letter as a final opportunity to summarize the offer or add one last compelling reason to act now.
Right. The PS is often the last thing people read, so it's a great place to make a strong final impression.
Exactly. And Kennedy provides a lot of creative ideas for how to use the PS effectively.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about understanding our audience, entering their conversation, highlighting benefits, using damaging admission copy, writing attention-grabbing headlines, structuring our message in a persuasive way, motivating action, and creating urgency. Is there anything else we should know?
Well, one thing I really appreciate about Kennedy is that he's very thorough. He doesn't just give you the big picture strategies, he also gives you very specific tools and checklists to help you put those strategies into practice. For example, he includes a really comprehensive copywriting checklist in the book, which is designed to help you make sure that your sales letter or any other piece of persuasive communication is hitting all the right notes.
Okay, tell me more about this checklist. What are some of the things it covers?
It covers everything we've talked about and more. It asks questions like, have you thoroughly answered those initial 10 smart questions about your ideal prospect and prioritized their core needs? Have you clearly translated every feature into a compelling benefit? Have you addressed potential disadvantages using damaging admission copy? Have you crafted attention-grabbing headlines and informative subheadlines? Is your call to action strong and clear? How have you presented your price? Have you included a strong and believable guarantee? Have you used storytelling effectively? Is the overall length and flow of your copy appropriate? Have you implemented the double readership path and internal repetition? And it even goes into detail about the visual presentation of your message, with a list of 27 essential copy cosmetic enhancements, which are basically visual elements that can make your message more readable and impactful.
So it's not just about the words themselves, but also about how they're presented visually on the page or screen.
Precisely. Kennedy leaves no stone unturned. He wants to make sure that you have everything you need to create truly persuasive communication.
That's amazing. It sounds like this checklist is an incredibly valuable tool for anyone who wants to improve their writing and communication skills.
It really is. I actually use it all the time in my own work.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the ultimate sales letter, what are some of the key takeaways that our listeners should keep in mind?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that effective communication, whether it's a sales letter, an email, a presentation, or even just a conversation, is all about understanding your audience and tailoring your message to their specific needs and desires. It's about entering their conversation, addressing their pain points, highlighting the benefits of your offer, and presenting your message in a clear, engaging, and persuasive way. And Dan Kennedy's The Ultimate Sales Letter provides a wealth of strategies and techniques for doing just that.
Absolutely. And for our listeners who are always looking for ways to learn and grow more efficiently, these principles offer a really powerful framework for both analyzing and creating persuasive communication in any field or situation. By understanding how to identify your audience, tap into their existing conversation, and clearly articulate the benefits of your message, you're already equipped with some incredibly valuable insights. So as you go about your day, I encourage you to pay attention to the various communications you encounter, from marketing emails to meeting agendas to casual conversations, and ask yourself, what assumptions are being made about me? How effectively are these messages addressing my existing conversation? And how can I use these insights to sharpen my own communication skills and become a more persuasive and influential communicator?
That's a great challenge.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.